Okay, we're gonna get started when you guys are done. All right. So this week we're talking about audience ratings. Basically the way we get to know who's watching what and the various industry activities that are connected to ratings. Before we jump into that, midterm exams were posted. They're probably available to you today. I don't know. I had to put them in yesterday. So very soon they should be available to you. So your midterm exam, your midterm, it's not an exam, your midterm grade calculation is based on the following assignments: media use diary, TV programming exercise we did in class, the research paper that you may or may not have turned in, which would really determine an enormous amount of this grade, quiz 1, and the midterm, and then the advertising analysis that we just got through with last week. So there's a number of points up there, and based on the number of points you made, I gave you the midterm grade. Michael?
I have a question.
Yes.
I logged on to Canvas to see like assignments that's been graded. It's graded, but it says missing too.
Well, you may have done something that you gave to me on paper, or you may have, for instance, done a presentation in class, in which case you didn't submit anything. And so then it would say missing. Even if, I would have given you a grade, let's say you got 25 out of 25 for the advertising presentation, because you didn't put any paper into Canvas, it'll say missing. But the assignment was for us to do it here online, in class, right? Now, a lot of people didn't attend class, so they had to turn that assignment in on Canvas. So if everyone had done it in class, I could set it up so there was no submission, and then it wouldn't say missing. But because some people do it in class, some people do it at home, then I have to leave it so it'll say missing in your case. But if we're talking about one of the in-class assignments, you did it for sure. Yeah. Okay?
It was just like weird because it did the same. Like some of my stuff on my other for my English class, it's all in-class assignments, and she grades it like the same day. But it also says a whole bunch of missing, and I talked to her, and she's like, well, I don't know, but like it's graded there, but it says missing.
Okay, well, you better ask her about it. But obviously, bottom line is you want those points to apply to your grade, whether the thing says missing or not. So, anyway, if there's a specific thing for my class, feel free to talk to me about it. That's what I'm here for. There is now some extra credit assignments that you can do because we are long past the point where the first of our research essays could be doable. We do have another one of those coming up for the end of the semester, and so we're going to do some extra work that is going to, we're going to prepare for that on the assumption that that might help everybody to get that final essay in. Because those essays are worth 100 points out of 500. Each of them is worth 20%. So that's pretty massive. And those who didn't turn in the first research essay on time are going to see that it really impacts your midterm grade and eventually would impact your final grade too. So I created some extra credit assignments to try to give those people a chance. Here they are. There are 4 possible extra credit assignments. You can make a maximum of 100 points total. That would be 100 out of 500 for this class. From extra credit, that would be all of these combined. So basically, if you did a couple of them and racked up your 100 points, there'd be no reason to do a couple more because you can only get a total of 100 points. Each assignment is worth up to 50 points. The required length is between 250 and 500 words. If you write 250 words, you may receive up to 20 points. If you write 500 words, you may receive up to 50 points for one of these extra credit assignments. You need to do extra credit assignments in the week before they are due. They will not be accepted if they are more than 1 week late. So what that means is you just I can't get like 4 extra credit assignments at the end of the semester or something. You have to do them as they're due. They're in the modules, but they're also linked here. So there's one coming up due next Tuesday if you want to do it. Let's take a quick look at it. Extra credit audience measurement assignment, because this week we are talking about audience measurement. So that's why this extra credit assignment is related to that. I don't want you doing them in advance because I assume you don't know exactly what we're going to say about things like audience measurement or other very specialized topics. So you want to do them in the week that we are discussing these topics so you know what we're talking about. So this extra credit assignment, which again, review the current Nielsen ratings. There's a link there. You could go look at the Nielsen's. Now consider the viewing, listening, surfing, shopping habits of yourself, friends, or family. Are the ratings consistent with your preferences and those of your friends or families? How many of the top 10 broadcast or cable shows do you regularly watch? Perhaps it's none. That's still important. How about the listings in other categories like music, gaming, and social media? Because Nielsen covers all of this. What about your roommates or parents? Parents usually have very different viewing shopping habits. This might be an opportunity to get in contact with your parents and learn more about what they do. Do you think the rating systems are outdated, limited, and or incorrect? This is entirely opinion driven, so that's a little easier to write than something which is fact-based. Do you have any ideas on how to get more accurate ratings? And so maybe some of our discussions in the next couple of classes would help you write this. And so, this could be worth 25 points if you write 250 words. It could be worth 50 points if you write 500 words. I better modify that down there. And this would be due on the 4th. And on the 11th, this would no longer be accepted. So somewhere between the 4th and 11th, you could submit this. And let's say if you wrote a couple of pages, you get 50 points, which is a pretty good deal, I think. So any questions about these extra credit assignments? There they are. So for some people, this will be the difference between passing or failing the class. So it is very important to actually pay attention and maybe do some of these so that you can make up extra points that you may have lost by not doing the full-length research paper. As I said, there is one more full-length research paper to do, which is due very much at the end of class. And we're going to start preparing that for that. We're going to take a visit to the library to learn about citing sources. And we're also going to look at each of those topics that are assigned in great detail, and I'll be telling you where you should look in the textbook for information and what kinds of strategies I would use in order to write the essays. And of course, I always have office hours. If you want to talk about essays or anything else, RX 170, 11 a.m. to noon, you can catch up with me on Tuesday, Thursday, which is just after class. So that's that for extra credit. Okay? No questions? Alrighty.
You have to cite them?
Pardon me?
Like, cite?
In these extra credit assignments, no. You just answer the questions and, drawing on the kinds of things that we've talked about. So, see if anyone has any questions in chat because, there we are. Okay. So, we're talking about audience measurement, past, present, and future. So if I could quickly summarize what this is all about is we once upon a time drew out a model of communication from senders to receivers with the notion of feedback, that in all forms of media, somehow the receiver feeding back to the sender gets us better communication because the sender figures out, well, what are they getting? What are they not? What are they interested in? What are they not interested in? So audience measurement is the primary form of feedback used in the broadcast industries. And another picture that I love to draw is one with the audience up here and advertisers down here. And program creators, let's say, or let's just write networks here if you want, if we're using old media. Sorry, my pen is kind of running out. But you remember this triangle. And so audience measurement is really a key thing in the industry because advertisers want to know how much they should pay in order to reach a certain slice of the audience. If we didn't have measurement, we wouldn't be able to say that one show is worth spending more on than another show, or that social media is a better place to spend your money than television, for instance. So we need some kind of objective or as close to objective measurement system as we possibly can. Oh, thank you. Oh, thanks, Jody. I know this pen, and this is a good one. So we need some form of objective measurement so that advertisers know how much money they should spend. And networks need to know about the audience because they need to know whether they should cancel and promote a show or, cancel or promote a show, basically. If the audience numbers look good, in part due to the various strategies that we talked about, tent polling, hammocking, blocking, counter programming, if you remember all those things. Well, the networks are doing all of that to try to increase those audience numbers. And that's how they pay attention to the strategies they use and even the shows that they launch or cancel, you know. So audience measurement is really important. But as we go forward into our crazy new media environment, where we've got things like Facebook and Instagram competing with the networks, we've got things like HBO Go or Netflix and Hulu competing with them. And we've got people watching everything they watch on phones or laptops instead of televisions. Things are becoming much, much more complicated for audience measurement. And yet there are enormous opportunities in the new media habits that we're forming, particularly on your phone. Because so much activity converges in your phone, they provide a fantastic opportunity for a new generation of audience measurement, which incorporates not just what you watch and listen to, but what you buy, where you go, the kinds of messaging that you exchange with different people in your life. All of that will now become integrated and available about every individual who's consuming through the phone that way. The only thing that's going to stop that are privacy laws and consumer choices. And right now, consumer choices seem to be, yeah, what the heck? I want my Facebook, I want my Instagram, I want my, YouTube on my phone, and damn what people know about me. And that may continue, I'm not sure. So looking forward to what we're talking about today, and we'll get more into it next class, is a revolution in audience measurement based on the phone and all that people will know about us doing that. For the moment, 90% of revenue in broadcasting still comes through what we're talking about today, which one of the words they use to describe this is linear in the industry anyway, and that's the idea of people watching television shows when they're broadcast and measurement of audiences, which is pretty similar to what we've been doing for the last 35 years, based on linear. In other words, by linear they mean there's a program schedule, it's Monday, there's 7 p.m., there's 8 p.m., there's 9 p.m., there's 10 p.m., and we measure it on Monday, and then we measure it out onto Wednesday as well in a +3 rating, and we may even go all the way out to the next Monday in a +7 rating. and so on. But it's very linear in the sense that the audience is consuming this as it's put out. And of course, the opposite of that would be binge watching 5 shows on Netflix over the weekend, and no one can really predict how you're going to consume in that new environment, versus the old linear TV environment is quite predictable. And a lot of choices are based on that. So that's a quick summary sort of what we're going to talk about in the next couple of days. And as you can see, it's really, really important to the industry, this audience measurement. If the company or the companies that do the audience measurement lose credibility, the whole industry is in trouble, basically, because it's hard to know how much something is worth until everyone can agree that, hey, 2 million people is worth, I don't know, maybe $500,000 for an advertisement buy. But if somebody said, well, 2 million people are skipping all the commercials and not watching it, maybe it's worth less. And that's really important. Okay, so we do have a little historical info. And, I think when we look up at this slide, we will all remember, or we've all heard about the Nielsen Company, which is the current leader in audience measurement. So back in the early days of radio and television, there were competitors, which of course have been gobbled up or gone out of business over the decades based on competition and convergence. Nielsen reigns supreme. They do TV. Last 10 years, they've also taken over radio. And the only thing they fear is somebody getting a jump on them in mobile, which is a distinct possibility. On the internet, for web ratings, there are competitors to Nielsen. Nielsen is big, but there's something called ComScore, and there's at least a few other companies that do audience measurement online as well. And then, of course, a platform like Facebook with billions of users conducts its own research, and they're almost bigger than any individual country's broadcasting system, if you want. There's probably more people in the Facebook audience than there are watching television all over the United States or anything like that. And so they themselves do their own audience research measurement, and so they're as big as a Nielsen by far. The only thing is, Nielsen's supposed to be a third party without any, stakes in the actual race, versus Facebook is a company that makes money off of selling its audiences. They may not be viewed as immediately objective. So in the early days, they started off thinking about audience research for radio, and they wanted to know, basically advertisers was, I'm thinking of buying some time on the radio, but who's actually listening? I don't know if I should, bother spending my money. And so radio needed some form of audience measurement, and they had a few different methods. The telephone recall system. They'd phone people up and say, do you remember what you were watching yesterday? How do you think that this might not be as accurate as, and by the way, we're in radio. Do you remember what you listened to yesterday? So how do you think this may not be as accurate as you could hope for? Someone calls you up today and says, what did you watch last night? Or what did you listen to last night? Or what did you listen to over the whole week? What do you think might go wrong?
Memory loss.
Memory loss. You might forget. Yeah, you can forget what you were watching, or listening to. It's still all radio. So they were aware that this was a problem, so then they got into the telephone coincidental method. They phone you up at 7 o'clock and they say, what are you listening to right now? So that would cancel out the memory problem. But what do you think would be a flaw in the telephone coincidental method? Someone phones you up.
It's invasive.
Pardon me?
It's invasive.
It's invasive. It could be a pain. You wouldn't pick up the phone. Like, why? I'm enjoying my show. Oh, no, it's them again. Right? So that's a problem. You might not pick up. All right? Any other problems you could see with this? think we're talking about 1930, latest 25, 30. What do you think? Would everyone have a phone? No, right? Maybe people who had radios would have phones, but not always. So then there's the problem of perhaps you don't have the phone numbers of enough radio listeners. Or basically, in other words, your telephone list doesn't accurately reflect the people who are listening to the radio. And then there's always the possibility that they might be lying, or they might not even know what they're listening to. Was it NBC? Was it CBS? Because you asked one of them, you know, what's your favorite show? And they'd probably tell you what the show is, but would they know what network it was on? Maybe not. What show? What local station? They might not. And so Nielsen came up with the audiometer, and the audi stands for audience, and meter is a meter. And that was supposed to be very objective because it was a little thing that went inside your radio so that when you turned the dial to tune to a different station, it would scratch a little line onto a paper, and at the end of the week, the family would take the paper out of their radio and mail it back to Nielsen. And so that was very objective because, you know, that little paper didn't lie, and you didn't have to remember where you went or, you know, what you were listening to because the audiometer would scratch it out for you. And this eventually became really you know, an industry standard that advertisers like to use. And so Nielsen became very successful based on the audiometer, which was a little machine, if you want. And in this day and age, they have, you know, more sophisticated machines to register what people are doing, but same thing. Nielsen is still with us. The diary system by a company named Hooper would send families diaries and ask them to fill them in during the week as to what they were listening to. So, you know, it's also important to be able to take this data and have it in a form where you can easily process it. Imagine you got 1,000 families using diaries, and you have to count up every day part, every hour that they were listening. People have to count this up and put it into a big table and then send that out to everybody, you know, all the advertising agencies who want to know about this. So the diary organizes the data in such a way, and this is early, you know, days when everything happened on paper. The diary organized it in such a way that it was actually usable. The other thing, so if we're talking radio and stuff, how it works now, Nielsen bought Arbitron 5 years ago. Arbitron used to be the main radio rating service here in the United States. The United States is divided up into a couple of hundred markets. Designated market area is a term which refers to, for instance, the San Francisco Bay Area, which would include San Francisco, Oakland, the surrounding communities, and San Jose, would all be grouped into our DMA, which is, I think, the 5th largest in the United States. So we are in a very influential and important market area for broadcasting. And this is in part determined through the reach of terrestrial broadcasting with big antennas like we have on Diamond Heights, you know, gigantic antenna that can cover, you know, 25, 30 miles with signal. And so that's why there are so many, you know, a couple hundred DMAs in the United States. They were all determined about, you know, as market areas that were served by terrestrial broadcast antennas and stuff. So this is what they measure. They're individual measurements for each market area, one for Los Angeles, one for San Francisco, et cetera, et cetera. And in radio, for most of the history of radio in the last 50, 60 years, in most of these markets, diaries are distributed by the audience measurement company. Now it's Nielsen. And they are filled in by people who get a small present for doing this work and monitoring their radio usage. The diary covers 7 days of time. It's in 15-minute time blocks. Do I have a picture of the diary? I do. Yeah. So a diary page looks like this. On Thursday, what time was it? What station were you listening to? And where were you? Now, why do you think they want to know where were you when you were listening?
You know where the audience is coming.
Yeah, so they have an idea of where the audience is and what the audience is doing. So if you were in the car, you check off the in the car box or something away from home. And that's very important because radio, as we know, really is still relevant largely because of its use in the car. That's where most people are listening to it, or in the workplace, second up. So you would note that down in the place. Very rarely is it used at home, but advertisers like to track that so that they know where the audience is, you know. Now, why would that be important to an advertiser to know where the audience is? Why would, you know, would the knowledge that someone is listening at 5 o'clock in a car influence an advertiser's choices? I say it would. Why would it? Like, picture yourself 5 o'clock in a car, maybe driving home from work. What would an advertiser, you know, want to dangle in front of you while you're driving home? Anything specific suggested by 5 o'clock and you're in the car?
Energy drink?
Josiah's energy drink because you're exhausted? That's a possibility. Fast food, you may be starving, so you may want to stop off and get a burger or something. So yeah, any kinds of products which might be appealing to somebody who's finished work, who's in the car, already mobile, already on the road, and maybe hungry, tired, etc. So yeah, they want to know for that reason. Okay, so the diary method is also in some television markets, but mostly Nielsen uses the set-top box for television research. So for radio, some markets are continuously measured. Some are measured only in particular times during the year. In television, all markets are measured 4 times a year in what are called the sweeps. So the sweeps are very important. They happen in November, February, May, and July. And they happen, some of them, for instance, the sweep that happens in May happens almost simultaneously with the biggest advertising sell-off events called the upfronts, organized by all the networks. And basically in May, they sell advertising time for the upcoming fall season. And so they really like to have a national picture of the audience that they can go before the ad agencies and the ad buyers and say, hey, we're CBS. We just measured our audience all over the country. We are the #1 network. We have more people aged 18 to 24 watching than anybody else, and blah, blah, blah. You know, all of the things that they're going to know about their audience are at their fingertips for the sales period, which typically sells up to $7-8 billion of advertising, which is as much as Google makes in a year from search. And so it's very important, that period. So the television ratings are done nationwide in the sweeps in order to support that kind of sales activity. They may also have some additional sweeps periods, and then they are constantly measuring the local stations as well. So remember, there's going to be national research done, and so that's the sweeps, and that's important to the networks. And then there's local research done continuously, which supports the ad sales of each local station. KTVU, K-Cron, or whatever. So they are constantly competing with other local stations for ad sales, right? And so they need measurements on a week-by-week basis in order to determine, you know, who's the #1 station in the Bay Area. If you're #1, you can sell your advertising for more than the other stations do. So that's very important too. In the last 10 years or so, what we've seen in the local large DMAs, in the large markets, they have switched over to a portable people meter, which is a little device about this, it's smaller, half the size of your cell phone, that people who are participating in the research, instead of doing a diary, they walk around with this little PPM, people meter, portable people meter on their body. It listens to everything that they are exposed to. And all broadcasting has little high frequency codes embedded in the broadcast that we can't hear, but that the people meter picks up and registers, oh, this person was listening to, KMEL for 5 minutes this morning, and it, tabulates that. It records it. At the end of the day, you bring it home, you put it into a little cradle thing, and it communicates all its data back to Nielsen. So in the bigger markets, let's say the top 15, or maybe we're up to 20 now in the country, they use this device rather than the diary, right? So we talked about all of the weaknesses of any recall method where you're depending on the audience to remember what it was they were listening to. There was always that weakness that they wouldn't remember what they actually listened to or when or stuff. All of that is solved by the people meter, which listens on your behalf, records what it is you've been exposed to, and then sends it into Nielsen. Now, this would seem to be super objective, but are there any inaccuracies that you could see that would come from the people meter? So we've solved the recall problem here, but are there other ways that this could be inaccurate? Imagine today you're walking around with a people meter on your belt or in your purse or whatever, if you have a purse, or in your school bag, and it is tracking everything you're exposed to. Could you imagine at any time that it would pick up some signal that you wouldn't actually be aware of or care about? Again, ideas? Let's say you go into a grocery store, the radio's on. Oops. They're going to say, well, yep, you listened to KMEL, if that was on the radio station or something. You listened to that for half an hour. Maybe you were sitting in a cafe or something doing your homework, and they were playing back some kind of broadcast music or something. Those codes would be picked up, right? And you wouldn't care about it. Let's say you went to, the doctor's office or something, a dentist. They've got that on in the background. You don't care about it. You don't even know it's on, and yet you are, credited with, or that station is credited with your attention and your choice to listen to them for half an hour maybe. So the PPM can, just spontaneously, well, not spontaneously, it can pick up all kinds of things that you're not really aware of. So it's still not as accurate as you would like. Challenges of gathering audience numbers. The ratings are always based on estimates. The samples must be representative. So let's talk about that for a second. You guys probably know, I'm sure, and there's some talk about it lately just because it's coming up pretty soon. Every 10 years, they count the population of the United States. Do you remember what the instrument is, what they use to do that? Happens every 10 years. What do we call it when we count every single person in the USA? Haven't heard of it? Census? You've probably heard of it now that I give you the word, right? So the census of the USA, which happens every 10 years, we try to account for every single person who lives in the United States. It's like the 300 million people about or more. That's a very challenging job to count up 300 million people and to ask all kinds of questions about them. And what's controversial right now is they want to introduce a question which is, are you a US citizen? And some folks who live here are not citizens, maybe not yet, maybe they never will be. Maybe they're scared of raising a hand and say, I'm here, if they're not a citizen. And so there's a bit of controversy about whether we should actually ask that question on the census. The census is incredibly important because it's used to determine how much resources goes to particular communities and stuff like that. So census is important. The main thing for us, though, is we count every single person, has to fill one in, right? Now, broadcast research doesn't work that way. We use what's called a sample. So that means we might have a sample of 3,000 people or households nationwide that is supposed to represent those 300 million people and what they are actually watching. And so, you know, we may have as little as one household per 100,000 in the population. So the sample, we have to make sure that the sample accurately reflects the population as a whole. And this is where the challenge comes in. We can only estimate, based on our sample of 3,000 households, we can only estimate what 300 million people are watching. We have to make sure that those 3,000 samples are good and representative of all of those people. That's the issue here. So if you break down your audience based on, for instance, ethnicity, and you may have 15% of the American population African American, you have to make sure that your sample contains 15% African American households or thereabouts. And similarly, they call it Hispanic, but Spanish-speaking audiences, if you have, you know, up to 25% in some states, you have to make sure that your sample contains that many Spanish-speaking households. If you don't, your sample is clearly off. It's clearly not representative of everybody that's there. And there have been a certain number of lawsuits brought against Nielsen, the ratings company, for underestimating the number of, you know, different audience samples in their ratings. Why? Because if you underestimate the number of Hispanic households in your area, they make less money in the advertising game. You know, if you underestimate how many viewers are available to Spanish language advertisers, the advertising agencies that cater to them don't make as much money. So this has actually been a case in New York State, for instance, where the Attorney General sued Nielsen, and they had to pay about $250 million to settle for having inaccurate samples. So Nielsen has to do a very, very good job at trying to represent the population at large, and it's not all that easy. Out of viewing location is also difficult because people are not carrying their diaries with them everywhere. And if we were talking about television viewing, the PPM, the personal people meter, is being used there, but it's also in combination with a set-top box and how and basically TV viewing at home. You go, you sit down in front of the television, you click a little button on the box to say, I'm here, so you should be, you know, measuring me. And then your people meter is there sucking up all the codes that are encoded into the television show and capturing that too. Together, all that is sent to Nielsen. If you're out of the home, if you happen to be, I don't know, at an airport or something like that, you're not going to get the same coverage. You may have watched 2 hours of TV waiting for a plane, and that will not be measured, right? So all of this is pretty challenging to Nielsen. Not to mention, how do they account for watching a YouTube on your phone? How do they account for, you know, streaming something off of Facebook, whatever it is now? There's series that are on Facebook and stuff. It's like they can barely keep up with all of the different ways that people are watching and consuming content now. When we get to the web, things are even more difficult. Traditional methods don't work adequately due to the millions of websites that are out there. You can't basically keep better track of that the way that we used to. So Nielsen still tries to track this. And what some broadcasters would love to know, for instance, is, okay, tell me about the audience that I got On the night that we did the show, within 3 days, within 7 days for people who DVR'd it, and I also want to know for that same episode of the show, who watched it on Hulu, who watched it on CBS.com, who watched it on CBS All Access streaming, okay? All of that just for one damn episode of, let's say, Big Bang Theory, or Big Bang, yeah, is that it? Theory, right, that's the show. A big CBS sitcom which is about to go off the air. So imagine you're Nielsen and you've got to account for this, based on your set-top box listeners, which is also connected to your DVR. Plus, you got to somehow connect the data when people watch it on these 3 different web platforms as well. Holy, blank. That's a very challenging thing that you've got to do. And you also probably want to know, did they click through something from CBS All Access and, for instance, go to a fan website, or, I don't know, did they buy an episode on Amazon? Oh, God. So there are third-party monitors who are looking at all this web activity as well. And if you're CBS, you have to buy some of that data from them, which you don't like to spend that money. For now, that's all you can do. Yes. So big challenges for gathering online audience numbers. The linear broadcast business has been doing this for 70, 80 years. Things are pretty clear. The internet is still shaking itself out. All of this has to be kind of discussed and worked over with the advertisers and with the audience measurement groups. And it is incredibly important to the business that this type of thing gets worked out. And it leads to huge lawsuits when people make mistakes. So it's a scary thing, for instance, for Nielsen and for broadcasters. I have students at San Francisco State who went to work for radio stations, and when the PPM came to San Francisco, there was like a real interesting effect. Prior to PPM, everyone used diaries, and they had to remember what it was they were listening to. So they would remember their top 3 stations. Oh, I listen to KOIT at work because it's background music and it's boring, but when I go out to party, I listen to KYLD or something like that. You maybe remember 3 or 4 different stations, and you always write them in. But when the PPM comes in and listens to everything that you listen to, including when you like spin the dial or are in the car switching between ones, all of a sudden they found that you used to have a market with 1, 2, 3 top stations and then a whole bunch of stations that you hardly listen to at all. What they found so this would be with diary, when PPM came in, all of a sudden everything was in the middle, because it counted all of these little marginal stations. You maybe didn't even remember you spent 5 minutes on them. Now they're all counted. So imagine the freak out when you used to be able to say with confidence, we're the number 2 station in San Francisco. At noon, everybody listens to us. And then now the ratings all of a sudden, because of the PPM, show that you're pretty much almost exactly the same as the number 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7 station. You can no longer say with any confidence that you're so much better than all those others. And so the people buying advertising say, well, why should I keep spending with you? Because number 6, which has almost exactly the same audience, is like $500 less. And what that means is you lose a lot of advertisers, your revenue goes down, you start laying people off, and it's pretty scary. Okay, so, and all of that just because you changed from diaries to PPMs. So these are big, big, important changes, actually, for the bottom line of people's businesses. Okay, so some terminology for old school linear. 2 terms that I want you to know for the exams and quizzes, quiz coming up, are ratings and share, okay? And we actually already saw these terms when we were doing our our television programming assignment in class, where, for instance, in order to know about hammocking, we were basically comparing the ratings, let's say a 9.53 and a 10.05 to a third show, which was maybe only a 6.05. So these numbers would have been either ratings or share. They're quite similar, but there is an important difference. So the rating is the estimate of people tuned in divided by the number of people who own a radio and TV set. And share is the estimate of people who tuned in divided by the number of people with a radio or TV that was on at that time. So let's take another closer look at that, all right? The estimate is always based on the set-top box and the PPM data. So let's say that it wasn't a very busy night here in the Bay Area, and the set-top box and PPMs are telling us that about 100,000 people, we estimate, were watching Big Bang Theory at that time. Okay? And so that number would be the same whether we are analyzing ratings or share. This is just the number of people, the estimated audience, that is returned to us by our measurement devices. So it's not going to change. You know, it's like we got 100,000. But what does change is down in the denominator. When we're talking about ratings, we are measuring against the entire number of households with TV in the market. So that would be, let's say, 1 million, just to make the calculation easy. Okay, so let's say, and so this is also called the universe. In other words, what the total possible audience could be, because that's how many households there are with TV. And then we just do a simple division. You know, 100,000 over 1 million is 10%. So the rating for that night in that particular market would be 10%. Now let's look at share, same night, same market, but we are comparing now the estimated audience versus the number of households that actually were watching. So this, the universe, is all possible households, okay? But this is the number of households that actually had the TV on. And so on any given night, not everybody who could be watching TV is watching TV. They're maybe doing something else. They're out at a party, or they're, you know, asleep or whatever. So share is always going to be a smaller number of TVs that actually were on. 500,000 is what is determined by by Nielsen. And so in this case, we do this ratio, and it turns out that share on that same night for that same program is 20%, okay? So the big difference between ratings and share is only, you know, what we are comparing the audience estimate with. In ratings, it is every possible consumer that's out there. In share, it is only the total group that was actually watching TV on that night. So share is always going to be a higher number than ratings. So if you were a broadcaster, why would you prefer to tell advertisers about your share rather than your rating? What looks better about this number than this? Say that louder, Chep. It's larger, right? You would always like to tell, if you're out selling, you'd always like to have a higher number, right? So share is always larger than ratings. And so you're probably going to want to tell them about share. Yeah, exactly. So of course, media buyers are well aware of this. They're not going to be fooled into thinking that, you know, because you give your audience statistics in share and your competitor gives it in ratings, they're going to know this. But it still just psychologically looks better to work with share, you know. So radio is a little bit different than television, because radio actually tries to estimate individual listeners, versus television works on a household basis, which could be 4 people in a household or so. But they're quite similar. And another difference about radio is that they rate based on the quarter hour, 15-minute segments. because people do so much channel surfing and switching away from advertising. Versus in TV, typically if you sit down for an hour-long show, you'll watch it for an hour, or a half-hour show, you'll watch it for a half hour. So radio is a little bit different than in that way, but mostly they're quite similar. So we have a kind of fun little YouTube on this. So this is a little video prepared by ESPN, and it's a few years back. It is targeted at potential advertisers for ESPN. So this is not something that was made to entertain, but rather to inform people who were thinking they were going to buy some advertising. A lot of what we discussed is presented in a more fun way.
Good evening, and welcome to the latest installment of Rating Center. I'm Chip Spaulding, alongside Clay Rogers here to cover the finer points of TV ratings. What do you say, Clay?
Well, Chip, it turns out our viewers have been tweeting up a storm. Everybody wants to know how the rating system works. Since we here at Rating Center consider ourselves the ratings experts, we feel it our humble obligation to give the people what they want. First, to size our audience, we turn to Nielsen. To estimate TV audiences, Nielsen starts by creating a sample that accurately reflects the population. They employ a random sample where all homes have an equal chance of being selected. This ensures that the sample mirrors the population according to gender, age, geography, race, cable status, and other characteristics.
So, say 49% of the population is male. Does that mean 49% of Nielsen's random sample is also male?
Well said, Chip. And all under 140 characters. Totes tweet-worthy.
Holy fastball, folks. I've just gotten word that a Nielsen correspondent is on her way to install a meter in an actual household. Let's go there live.
Thanks, Chip. I'm about to place a meter that monitors usage on every TV, DVR, DVD, and game console in the home. Like a dog whistle that only the meter can hear, audio codes embedded in TV content identify the network, date, and timestamp. The Nielsen sample consists of homes that agreed to participate for up to 2 years. The meters have remotes pre-programmed with each household's members' info. They log in when they start watching TV and log out when they're done. That data is then sent back to Nielsen each night to be processed.
Wow, looks like networks and advertisers really know their key audiences. You mentioned DVRs. How do those factor in, Chip?
Funny you should ask, Clay. I actually majored in statistics.
Oh, really?
Yes, really. To get the most accurate ratings, you have to look at all viewing behaviors. Not only do you consider those who watch live, but also live plus same day and live plus 7 days. What are you doing over there, Clay?
I'm tuning in so I can watch us live. I need to check out my sexy stash on screen.
Oh, totally sexy. I always just set my DVR to record us and study my Don Johnson stare at night when I get home. That reminds me, I need to set my DVR to record Real Housewives of Bristol while I'm on vacay for the rest of the week. That's the first thing I'll watch when I get home at the end of the week.
Hey! So to recap, boys and girls, live viewing means you watch the program as it was happening. Live plus same day viewing means you either watched it live or watched it from your DVR within the same day. Live plus 7 viewing means you either watched it live or watched it from your DVR within 7 days of when it aired.
Thanks, Clay. Well, we've reached that time in our program where we perform our ratings formula. For that, let's go to expert number cruncher Baxter Orion.
Thank you, Chip. Nielsen has gathered the data from the meters to project the number of homes or viewers watching in the entire population. This is known as impressions. Additionally, each cable network has a total number of subscribers possibly watching a program known as its universe. When we take the number of impressions and divide it by the universe, we get a percentage, which is our cable coverage rating. Now, let's say 2 different cable networks had 25 million people watching in prime time. One network had 100 million subscribers, while the other had 50 million subscribers. Putting this in our formula, we get, the first network delivered a 25.0 coverage rating, and the other delivered a 50.0 coverage rating.
Exactly, because the first network's universe is double the latter. It's also important to remember that a rating is an average minute statistic. So, let's say the Monster Truck Rally earned a 25.0 rating. Then 25% of cable network subscribers were watching during the average minute of that telecast.
Oh, and what about commercial minutes? Do they count toward the program rating too? Huh? Do they?
Oh, you bet they do.
All minutes of the program are averaged together.
But many advertisers only want ratings for the commercials.
For that, we just take the average of each commercial minute's rating in that program, and we include anyone who watched live, plus any DVR playback within 3 days. We call commercial ratings C3 ratings. The C stands for commercial, and the 3 stands for viewing within 3 days. Bax, you're blowing my mind. What else you got?
Cable network ratings can also be represented as U.S. ratings. Only now, the U.S. ratings universe includes all TV homes in the country. The number of impressions is now divided by the number of possible viewers in the entire country. This universe is used for all broadcast networks and, ultimately, for comparing one cable network to another.
And that's all she wrote.
Well, that's about all the time we have for this week, folks. This is Chip Spaulding.
And I'm Clay Rogers for Rating Center saying, Go
forth and calculate.
This is ESPN, the Entertainment and Sports Programming Network.
Okay, so as I said, that's probably too wonkish for your mainstream audience, but it wasn't created for, your regular audience. It was created for people who want to advertise on ESPN. So just to sort of draw out some of the main ideas, as they mentioned, in the cable world, they're interested in live. The C3 rating, which is mostly of interest to commercial ad buyers and advertising agencies. They want to know how many people watch their commercials. So they typically give that as a C3 rating within 3 days of broadcast. They want to know how many people watch their commercial. And that's because, let's say Target has some promo that they put up in a commercial. They're going to give people time to get to the store and respond to it and buy whatever was on that commercial. So within 3 days is of interest to them. And then the Live Plus 7 number is mostly of interest, for instance, to networks that would like to know, okay, how's Big Bang Theory doing? Should we cancel it? Should we keep it on? They're interested in knowing, okay, some folks watched it live, some folks watched it Live Plus 7. So within a week, they want to know who has watched it. Basically, taking account of the DVR. As you could see, they don't really have a system really formalized yet in terms of putting together this data with who watched it streaming and that kind of thing. So that is, out of, at least it wasn't in their capability at the time that that video was made, right? And then they also talked about ratings and share. At first they began, it was a little bit different because, we were talking about broadcast numbers, they were talking about cable numbers, and so each cable system has its universe. Let's say Time Warner would have, 30 million subscribers, and so that would determine its overall audience. But a little bit later in the presentation, they did mention that even cable channels sometimes compare themselves against broadcast networks, which use as their universe all possible television households and stuff. And so they did talk about ratings there in terms of that. And we talk about share as another very important number, which is maybe a little more attractive to broadcasters because it's always higher. And after all, why not just compare yourself against those people who are watching on that night live versus compare yourself against everybody who has a TV, which is a giant number, So this is basically stuff I'd like to get into next class, where I would like to talk about, the kind of cutting edge of audience research as it tries to respond to the new challenges of streaming services as a way of having to account for streaming services in addition to all the usual linear audience activity, which is what Nielsen has typically taken account of. And then also to talk about how, this is very useful information to come up with the audience numbers, but ultimately what advertisers would like to do would be able to combine audience numbers with consumer activity to get a good sense of, okay, like how worthwhile is it to advertise on Big Bang Theory versus, for instance, using social media, using print media, using all the other options that are open to advertisers. They don't necessarily have to spend their money only on TV. So we want to get into the ways that ad buyers compare the performance of different media buys and stuff like that, and also how they are, combining data, because this is all basically data. So data is our new fancy word for it, but this is just data. How do they combine broadcast data with consumer data, like cash register data, how much stuff was sold, or market research data, looking at zip code by zip code, who buys Mercedes in this zip code versus who buys Subaru versus who buys, a secondhand car that isn't even tracked. So all of that they would like to be able to package together and keep it accurate enough for it to be valuable. So there's, new horizons that we can talk about next class, right? So, and we should spend a little more time next class talking about your possible extra credit, right? So, where are those? Did I close it up? Shouldn't have closed it up. That was a little too fast. So let's come back to today's extra credit possibility, which, as I said, would be essential for some people to actually pass the class to do some of these extra credits. And so there's one due next week about audience measurement. So let's just revisit this again. In a way, I'm just trying to remind you that this is an option that's available to you. So if we looked at the current Nielsen ratings, they might be more meaningful to us now. Yeah, let's just see if, hopefully, I haven't been here to verify this. Yeah, discover what Americans are watching, reading, playing, browsing, buying, and more. So if we look through the national ratings, and Nielsen has a whole lot of information that they don't give away for free, but they do give us some of this stuff. So, primetime broadcast, NBC doing very well with football, Fox doing well with football, CBS dominating in the dramatic series or comedies and dramatic series and stuff as they have. Good Lord, Young Sheldon, the spin-off from Big Bang Theory, the number 6 highly viewed show, a 6.6, okay? Wow, 10,690,000 individual viewers. And you can, look through and find other listings, right? If you want to just look at cable and stuff like that. You can look at music and stuff like that. So, I just wanted to give you something that you could look through, look at and say, okay, wow, I've never even watched Big Bang Theory. Is this really very important based on what I watch? But maybe there are other media forms that are tracked in there. Maybe you do watch football, or maybe not. So look through here and think about, okay, that's what kind of ratings information is here. Maybe it's pertinent to me. Maybe it's pertinent to my mom and dad who are at home and watch a lot of TV. Are the ratings consistent with your preferences, those of your friends, families? So, this would be interesting. You could write about, yeah, I don't watch that show, but I watch other shows like that. Or I don't watch any TV, I play a lot of games. So check out some of the gaming data that's in there. How many of the top 10 broadcast cables do you watch? Listings in other categories, are they pertinent to you? And then, so do you think the rating systems are outdated, limited, or incorrect? So basically, if you don't watch any TV at all, and you look in there and, you know, there's the name of a game or two that you've heard of but you don't play. Does that mean that you don't count? Or does that mean that the ratings are, you know, not accurate enough for you? In next class, you know, we'll talk about other forms of ratings that will capture your activity. But for now, you know, you might start already thinking and writing on this idea that, do you have any ideas on how to get more accurate ratings? You know, maybe we should change the way that we do samples so that don't necessarily reflect the entire country, but we might have a universe only of young people that could capture you, you know? So think about that. It's maybe we should do ratings that are broken down by age groups and stuff, and that would capture you and activity for people of your age better than those national samples, right? Because I guarantee you, the audience that's watching NCIS, they're probably about 60 years old, you know? So that may be a top 10 based on, you know, this number 4, but guaranteed there are very, very few people in your age group who are watching these things. So check that out if you can. And so like video games, how does that show up? Oh my God, I don't even know any of these, but probably you do. Call of Duty, I've heard of that. So there you go. You can make, if you write 500 words on this topic, you could make up to 50 points. That would be replacing half of that research paper that you may or may not have done. All right, so this is a great opportunity, but you have to do this before November 11th if you're going to write on this topic. And there are 3 other ones that you may write about going forward as we look into other stuff. Social media, that could be a fun one to write about. Operations, now that was going to be a tough one because that's about what goes on in actual local radio and television stations. So that's actually how they do things day to day. So media influence, we'll see. But I want to make sure everybody understands if you have, you know, only 250 points out of 500 when we finish this class, you're not going to pass this class. So if you didn't turn in a research paper that was worth 100 points, you need to do some of this in order to pass the class. So just saying, and I'll keep on saying it, but it's there for you. So I encourage you to take advantage of it. And now we are done. So I'll see you Thursday for more talk about audience measurement.